what vendor the officers are sent to regarding that equipment. So there are vendors that, because they carry a specific line of clothing or particular piece of equipment, that benefits substantially, because you have 1,000 officers now going off to buy, a $250 jacket.
And I think it parallels exactly what we've seen for decades with the military-industrial complex. You can very easily tailor your request for a proposal to something that makes this particular product over here the only one that fits that RFP. And then you've got a no-bid contract. We've seen it done with Halliburton, for example. I mean, you can do this over and over again. The military does this constantly. And I think that's a big part of what we're seeing now is the military-industrial complex moving into the surveillance state, to the police state, the militarization of the police. They see it as a major profit center. Just another element of that corruption. Now, one thing I want to talk to you about is the case of Mary Hahn, because this is someone that you knew personally, and we hear a lot about the number of shootings that are there. We've seen the attitude of the police change towards the public. We've seen questions of ethics and corruption with these no-bid contracts. But there's another aspect of this too, and that is people who stand up to the system, a civil rights attorney like Mary Hahn, and what happened to her. Tell us a little bit, for those who are not in Albuquerque, tell us a little bit about Mary Hahn and why she was not liked by the APD.
She was a very prominent and very aggressive civil rights attorney that brought a significant amount of litigation against the city and against the department, as well as other police departments in the state, and prevailed on many, many actions to the benefit of citizens that were harmed and had their rights violated by government actors, whether it's the police or actually even city employees. And she, first in New Mexico, I mean, as a female and as an Asian, she was very outspoken and very distinctive. And she really brought a lot of heat on the department and really pushed back on a lot of misconduct. And in November of 2010, she was found deceased. And at her scene, it was flooded by 3 deputy chiefs, other lieutenants and captains. I mean, a completely departure from how a normal unattended suspicious death will be processed. So they flooded the scene, and in doing that, they precluded any reasonable investigation into it.
Let's unpack that a little bit, because we have the public safety director, Darren White. He gets a call, and then they looked at his phone records, and there was an unknown caller came to him, and then moments later, he sends out a whole bunch of calls to the city attorney, to deputy police chiefs that are there, several of those, also to assistant city lawyer. I mean, these are some of the most powerful people in law enforcement and in city government, and they all turn up at her house. And it's so many people that the guy that was there, the first responder, said that he'd never seen anything like that before. He said it was totally unprecedented. They totally destroyed the crime scene. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. And I mean, for anyone else, if they called the police because of, finding a coworker or a friend having passed away when they weren't expected to, because they didn't have an illness or have any problems going on, the response is from the ground up with your first responders. And then, the basic protocol is an unattended death is a suspicious death, and all suspicious deaths are processed until they've figured out what they are. Mm-hmm. You have a diminutive 100-pound Asian female, and in theory, she passed away from carbon monoxide poisoning, but they never did any investigation to support that declaration, which was made by a deputy chief that had by a captain at that time, that had no business being there, had no business inserting himself into the investigation whatsoever. And then you have the public safety director, the city attorney, you have public information officers, you have other deputy chiefs, and I'm told there's the allegation is that there's as much as 25 unauthorized personnel that flooded that scene.
And one of these reports I saw here says the deputy chief of police, Feist, went to the house and removed all first responders. And then what happened was she had a couple of heirloom family pieces of jewelry that were valued at $100,000. They went missing. But talk about some of the anomalies of the crime scene. I understand her feet were she was on the driver's side where the steering wheel is, yet her feet were on the dashboard and she had a broken toe?
The way she was positioned in the car, she was sort of crunched into the front seat. Both of her left feet were pushed up on the dashboard between the steering wheel and the door. There's indications that the door was slammed shut, and when it did so, it compressed her feet. So, when she went into rigor mortis, that impression is significant on her feet. So it's not as if someone relaxed and put themselves to sleep in the car. It shows compression. All the windows in the car are down. Now I've taken suicides or attempted suicides by vehicle emissions, and not only do they always have the windows up to keep the amount of air out, but there's usually a hose going from the exhaust into the cabin of the car. I mean, we have the exact opposite here. There's increased ventilation.
Also, the car was not running and still had half a tank of gas, I understand.
Exactly. And we're talking about a BMW that should have continued to run until it ran out of gas, but no, it still had fuel in it, and it had a dead battery. So, there are plenty of flags saying, wait a second, something's wrong here. But because of the actions by the brass of this department and those individuals that were leaders of the department and their absolute deliberate indifference, if not, conspiracy to make this happen, she gets written off as a suicide. And any homicide detective out there knows that if you want to cover up a murder, you stage it to look like a suicide. And that's what happened.
Yeah, and the New Mexico Attorney General, Gary King, has said that he did not think that it was definitely a suicide. He was very wishy-washy about it. He says, I can't say that it was, the evidence does not definitively indicate that she took her own life. He wouldn't come out and say that it looked like she was murdered, although it clearly does look like she was murdered.
Yes.
Yes. Well, now, that was kind of a watershed moment for you, wasn't it, Thomas?
For me, it was. I mean, that put me in a position where, if I was already on the path of, of progression from getting my master's, from promoting the department, and I knew I was headed to law school. But at that point, it was very clear to me that this is a department that, you're either with them or you're against them. And to be with them, sometimes meant you had to endorse, illegal or absolutely conduct that's in conflict with the oath we take to wear our badge. Now, where it got crystallized for me is when the following year is when the department terminated this officer, John Doyle, who's arguably absolutely one of the best officers I've ever encountered in my life. And, they went at him at a level that I never, ever, ever had seen in terms of the aggression to not only terminate his employment, to actually try to criminally indict him. And in the setting of all the things that I had seen and all the times they looked away, and all the pressure that I'd felt or had been pushed upon me to, not make waves, which that's what I would do. It's like, this is wrong. This either needs to stop or be fixed. I mean, that's what we do as cops.
What happened to Officer Doyle? Tell us what happened. Our Officer Doyle, you tell us.
Before I was terminated, there was a shooting where there was bulletins being put out about Aryan Brotherhood gang members who were threatening the Albuquerque Police Department. It was over like a year period, and just prior to that, in 2011, was this shooting. It was a police-involved shooting where an alleged member of the Aryan Brotherhood was shot by the police. During that shooting, I was briefed, during numerous other encounters with other detectives and APD personnel in reference to other gang members. And namely, one in particular was Nicholas Bloom, who was wanted for was a suspect in a murder that happened at a hotel where a girl was shot in the head. He was also wanted on warrants. I believe it was 2 warrants for it was home invasion. It was aggravated burglary, false imprisonment, kidnapping, stuff like that. So I was given a pretty good history on this guy and description of this guy and shown photos of this guy. So I knew he was a pretty bad guy. That, and besides what the officers were telling me about this guy, that he was kind of on a warpath. He told the officers that, he was going to shoot the next cop that he encountered. So, we were kind of on a heightened awareness about this guy. And about a couple of days later, we run into him. He goes through an intersection at high rate of speed in front of us, and we get behind him. He pulls to the side of the road, and then he just right after that, he takes off again. and winds up going in oncoming traffic for a few blocks, almost hits a few cars. It's about 8:20 at night. Turns, goes around behind a hotel, and it crashes into the back of the hotel. He's got an accomplice in the truck with him, and he's armed with a handgun. He bounces out of that truck and runs, and my partner goes in foot pursuit and gets caught in the basement of Barcelona Suites, where he's apprehended by my partner. As he chases him, drops into the basement, about a 7-foot drop into the basement, and as he's running, he's reaching into his waistband, for a weapon. Mm-hmm. So as this progresses, I lose sight of my partner. He goes into the parking garage and tackles Nicholas Bloom as he's again reaching. I didn't see this because I was still seconds out. I had lost sight of my partner. He's in this parking garage, and then I come in. When I look up as I land in that parking garage, they're fighting on the ground, and he's trying to get his arms out from underneath of him. When I run up, that's when I see it's definitely Nicholas Bloom. It's this guy I'm briefed on, and his hands go to his waistband. They go underneath of him, and my partner yells he can't get his hands. He's reaching for something. Immediately, I start with kicks. The distractionary technique, officers say distractionary technique, and it's a way of describing things. It could be anything. It could be kicks, punches, whatever. Technically, you'll describe distractionary kicks, but I use distractionary techniques, but I use kicks. I use kicks to force his hands out rather than going to deadly force. Mm-hmm. I used those strikes, and it was explained to the department. It was explained to my commander why I did that. Fearing going to the ground with the subject. My partner's already on the ground, approximately 30 yards away, and another 30 yards away is the entry points where anyone in the public can come right into that parking garage and have an upwards vantage point. And actually, the second suspect had Nicholas Bloom's gun. He had dropped it in the truck as he was getting out. I believe he did not know he had done that. That's why he had reached on 3 separate accounts during the foot pursuit. Twice during the foot pursuit. And then when he gets on top of him, he's reaching. And hence my partner yelling that he's reaching for a gun. He admitted to ingesting cocaine, admitted to drinking alcoholic beverages, was totally out of control that night. I knew we had just a totally out of control subject on our hands. I explained this to my commanders, and I myself went to the management to obtain the video footage that was subsequently released to the media, and to document my actions, to show what I had done. I had written my report as to what I had done, and I had then submitted that tape. Submitted my report. My supervisors had then gotten the videotape, submitted that tape during their investigation. An internal affairs investigation was opened up on me, where I explained, due to the fear of Nicholas Bloom reaching like that, my partner being on top of him, trapped on top of him, fighting with him, the fact that we were using our in-car radio, so our handheld mics were off. From the time we called out with the incident where we spotted the subject starting to accelerate at a high rate of speed and crossed into traffic, almost striking vehicles, it was about maybe a mile, where he had taken off in his vehicle, and to where he had crashed, and then it was maybe a 2.5 block foot pursuit, and then a struggle inside the basement of the complex, was altogether around 75 seconds. This guy had escaped twice before from tactical units. And
did they maintain that you had not handled this properly, that you should not have fought him? What they maintain, you should have shot him, or what?
Well, that's been said. People have come up to me and said, you've been better off if you would have shot him. You live and you learn. I believe we did do the right thing. We lethal force is the last thing you want to use. I mean, I was brought up in 1990. I've been involved in a lot of lethal force encounters that I chose not to use deadly force in. And, and because of that, lives were spared. And a lot of these people, some of these people have actually gone on to rehabilitate themselves and become better citizens. So it's the last thing. It's the very last thing you want to use is deadly force.
Yeah.
I consider it a failure if there's other options, that present itself, and you have to take a life. Then again, sometimes you have to do it, but if you can avert it, you do. And as a police officer, that's your job.
Yeah.
And And that night, like I've said to other people, like I've said to other, people that I've talked to in interviews, that use of force looks horrible, no matter what it is.